Hey James, how are you doing today?
Very well, and yourself, Ben?
I'm doing great. I got up, went for a run at the lake today. I got a car delivered. I'm feeling great. Ready to have a good talk with you because we've known each other now only for 6 months, but it feels like years.
Yeah,
And like I've always enjoyed talking with you. You have a deep knowledge of supply chain and mobility that makes your stories fascinating to me. And I'm really excited to learn more about you as well as just do an interview and talk about supply chain today. But how about you? How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. I didn't have a car delivered, but I went for a nice stroll this morning when I dropped my daughter off at school. Um, yeah, I've just had a rather interesting day. And I'd agree. You know what? We've taken 6 months to get to know each other, and it does feel like it's been a lot longer than that. Um, and maybe that's a part of what I'm enjoying about the jump from where I was to where I am now is the world was bigger than I realized it was, and there's a lot more people in it that I'm really getting to enjoy to meet,
Mhm.
like yourself, for example, and Holly. And I have to just put it in here that I've had one or two people comment to me in the fact that you sent out your post, and I just wanted to also say that she absolutely deserves all the praise she can get for the implementation that we went under together.
She absolutely does. I really appreciate what you said about her. I've been blown away with Holly since we hired her. I guess it's been about a year and a half, but she's fantastic, and there's nothing that she can't do. So, but thank you again. I really appreciate it. And why don't we start by learning more about where you came from, your supply chain background, because I that's part of the story that I really don't know, and I'd be interested here. So, can you tell us a little bit about where you came from, how you grew up, and how you got into supply chain? And
Well, I have two very distinct lives. I have a life in the UK and a life in South Africa. And prior to coming to the UK, I did a lot of work. I was a jack of all trades, maybe masterful at one or two, but not really a master of any of them. Um, I really I excelled. I ran a lot of clubs, pubs, and restaurants.
really,
I did very well in the hospitality area. Just before I left the UK, I spent 2 years working at a IT company that dealt in the recovery of data from damaged hard drives or crashed computers. Which, I mean, now that they don't exist and it's 20 years later, that was an absolute farce. It was an absolute money making machine. But anyway, but I guess it's relevant to mention that because it kind of brought me into the environment of working in an office environment, working in a more corporate environment. So when I came to the UK, I could make that jump. I went into Arbor PHH, which was PHH back then,
hmm
still a derivative Sendent. I didn't really know at the time of making the jump from PHH to Sendent Mobility at the time that the two companies were one and the same.
hmm
Once upon a time. Um, and I guess Sendent Mobility was my introduction to the mobility industry,
sure.
um, as it is now Kpis. I started in operations, and I just want to take a quick pause to anybody that works in operations in the mobility industry and is on the cold face of everything that's going on. I absolutely admire and respect you because I don't think I could have coped another year in that role. My genetic makeup is not there, but I got an opportunity to apply for a position in supply chain at Kpis, and I guess the rest they say is history. It's something that I relate to. I enjoy speaking to people. I enjoy partnering with people to make things happen. And my journey was quite a quick one from there. I spent a few years working as a senior consultant. I got promoted to manager. I did a few years doing that, and then it got really interesting after that. And probably why people don't really know me that much in the industry. There are going to be certain people that do, but a lot of people don't, is because I never owned a network at Kpis. And Kpis has network managers or directors and owners.
Mm-hmm.
I never fell into that category. Kpis created a special role called supply account management.
Okay.
And what we were effectively responsible for doing was managing the clients. What I like to say is that We were the supply chain expert within the client services team, and
Okay.
the client expert within the supply chain management team.
So is your role more suited towards taking the data from the supply chain, making that into a story that's digestible by the clients, and if there's a performance issue, talking with your clients, understanding, okay, here are the options and how we can manage the supply chain. Is that sort of what you did?
Absolutely. I mean, one of the things that I don't want to ruin anything before, but as we've led up to this, one of the phrases that we've been throwing around is, you know, making supply chain sexy again. Stretch of the imagination, but I think it is there. And I think what they cottoned onto there was everybody takes for granted when you go into an organization and you're actually buying a service from them, there's this huge supply chain that sits behind,
Sure.
makes things happen and makes sure that everything goes from point A to B to C, etc.
Hmm.
And that's typically all taken for granted.
Hmm.
And why the supply account manager role was pulled into place is it's a fundamental part of what's actually happening. If people are moving people around the world, what are the hot points? What are the trends within the supply chain?
Yeah.
What's actually happening? What's being improved? What are you identifying? How do we demonstrate we're always looking at your client? And account management does a great job at looking at what we're doing for the client, as in your business, and how you're watching their finances and how you're controlling over everything along the lines of their KPIs.
Hmm.
Supply chains play such a big part in that as well.
Do. They do. That was honestly, so like my background, I'm a supply chain expert. I was in procurement for 15 years. And when I got to Accenture and became focused in mobility, and I raised my hand, I was like, oh, this is weird. I've never seen an industry that is so dependent on a very diverse supply chain. In that, like when you look at relocation management companies, a lot of what they do is manage supply chains.
Yeah.
And I just found it fascinating because I was running RFPs on behalf of like 50, 60 clients, and we were focusing on fees. The first couple times around, I was just focusing on fees, and then I realized, oh, it is that's 2% of it. Like everything is going to these suppliers, and how these companies manage their supply chain is really paramount to the success that my client experiences. And yet I couldn't really evaluate it. I would meet with the supply chain manager at Servo, Cardis, and the other 5 different people in the RFP, different companies in the RFP. But very rarely could I evaluate any differentiation other than I like that guy, I don't like that guy. And so that made me want to get deeper into the supply chain here. And I think your role at Cardis is fascinating, and what you're doing at Clearmove is really fascinating too. With really you're trying to reimagine the supply chain for mobility and really drastically simplify it.
Well, I think and this is where I have to be grateful for everything that we've done and all the past experiences you've had. And I'd be remiss in saying that Cartus wasn't a big part of this, but
Sure.
this is not about Cartus. This is about Clearmove. So I'm actually able to take all that experience I've had in that unique role there. And there's different experiences I've had with both clients and partners that kind of, you have a little bit of a light bulb moment. Uh-huh. Um, and you make those things work. For example, managing global relationships with a partner. Typically it's one key point of contact. You're talking to them about your larger engagement. But sometimes what happens is when you're dealing with one partner that's probably got, 60, let's be honest, about 10,000 transactions through you, and you're trying to talk about service on maybe 500 of those transactions, when their SLA is sitting up at what they need to be performing better than 93.5%. And they're sitting there at the 92.89% or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
But you come to them about a portion of their 10,000 volume, which is
Right.
500, one client, and saying, we're below 70% on this client. What's going on? Oh, but look at our greater relationship. And I've always struggled in this role insofar as
Hard.
you want to leverage your 10,000 instructions to get the best possible custom play. And if you want to do that efficiently and manage the cost that way, you need to be efficient on how you manage everything as well. And then you kind of throw a spoke in the wheels by saying, well, actually, that 10,000, transaction kind of makes up 1,500 clients. And I'm coming to speak to you about one of those clients that's got 500 of that. So when you put that into the greater scheme of things, you need to be standing up and paying attention.
Yeah.
And I guess the point that I'm trying to make there, and we can go into this as we go through it as well, is how do you make that information available to your partners? How do you actually say, you know what, here's everything, here's how it works. This is how we need you to be monitoring things. Whether that be monthly, quarterly, annually, which I honestly think it's good to be looking at things on a regular basis.
Mm-hmm.
I think if you're looking at things monthly, you're behind the ball. When you're dealing with 10,000 transactions every year,
Sure.
you want to be looking at that data every single day. You want to look at, imperceptible little shifts at a point in time and see if they carry on trending for 3-4 days.
Especially now where there's such change in the supply chain.
Absolutely.
And we're seeing partners go out of business. And like the last thing, I speak more moving than any other supply chain within the mobility silo. But if you have a transferee's goods in temporary storage at a mover that goes out of business, whoa, that is a huge problem. And so I think you're right. I think having that data at within days is really where you want to be. I mean, like everyone talks about, we want instantaneous on-demand data. I think in this space, it's not really the individual data points. It's the signal that you're seeing and spotting trends. And, the more data that we have available to us, the more we can drive performance. And I think where things become really important and interesting is when that data actually becomes part of the decision process that the account management and counselors can use in guiding their transferee through the process.
And I think 100%. And I think that's been the success of that role in the past. And what we're developing in Clearmove as well is all data points have to be relevant, and everybody that's a stakeholder in that move needs to know what's going on. I don't think everybody needs to know what's going on at exactly the same time, because that can create unnecessary fuss, but
sure,
it's about accountability. So let's say, for example, something goes happen at one of the milestones. Let's take moving, for example. Survey's been completed, everything's all right. You've booked a date for the pack and load, everything's moving along smoothly. You get there halfway through the pack and load, which is probably at the end of day one. Customer's not happy. There are a few people that need to know that the customer's not happy. Yeah, obviously the crew doing the pack and load should be aware of it, but we know our customers don't always enjoy a bit of confrontation, so they'd rather keep it bottled up. So you need to have a way to check and do a bit of quality assurance there. So whoever's managing that crew, whether it be an agent or the actual van line themselves, needs to be aware of what's going on there. If it's a crew, the van line, and an agent, both those people need to know what's going on there. Your managing party, the third party, whether it be an RMC or somebody like Clearmove, that's a software proposal where they've got a consultant actually managing the experience, those people need to know straight away that there's something that's not good. So between the agent, the van line, and the consultant managing that file, you've got 3 opportunities to do a check-in with that customer and make sure that information is shared between all 3 of those parties immediately.
Yeah.
And
that can turn things around. Like if you have that data right then and there, you don't have anger that's like just growing through the process. You can resolve and hopefully amicably solve those challenges right then and there.
Yeah, absolutely. And what happens is then, you've got an HR individual who's responsible, or an account manager who's responsible for overseeing all of that, or an account manager and an HR individual. What you can do then is trigger it so that 2 days later, they get the notification, but because everybody else has been working on it for the last 2 days, hopefully, it's simple enough that you got the resolution in. So what the account manager and the HR contact are getting is they're getting, this is flagged up, customer raised this concern 2 days ago, this is what's been done, this is the resolution, customer satisfied again. Um, and it's small bits of data like that. And I think if you measure that as well, and I get, this is where I get geeky and where I probably think supply chain is sexy, and that's because my head works a little bit differently to most people, is if you can track that data and see those things happening, it's not, it's not the actual tracking and seeing those things happening, it's being able to achieve something with that data and turn something around and demonstrate that to somebody.
Mhm.
That's the sexy part of it.
Yeah.
When
So you said it a couple times now, supply chain isn't sexy. And we've talked about that before. And honestly, I felt that way in my career, that supply chain wasn't sexy. I didn't see a lot of like Ivy League graduates going and I'm going to go into supply chain. That wasn't my experience. I sort of stumbled into it because I did a Baldrige quality audit in my MBA program. I just found improving things interesting, and I stumbled into a procurement supply chain consulting gig in New York at JV Kelly, and I just, it was like, it was very me. I remember being a young kid, like probably 10 years old, using a spreadsheet to decide which Walkman I was gonna buy. Well, this one had auto reverse where you could just push the button and it did. The other one you had to flip a switch, and this one had set better. Like, that's making complex decisions auditable was something that was just inherent to me. And but throughout my career, I never really found people that found supply chain sexy. And yet, I think we are entering that period where it's becoming really important to organizations. COVID has shown the frailty of our supply chains. Like, Amazon Prime wasn't Amazon Prime for, it's still not really back to where it was. Like, I was talking with my mechanic last week, and he said, I order something on Amazon Prime and now it takes 2 weeks to get here, which, I mean, 100 years ago, that's amazing. But when your expectations are this, it's like the supply chain is broken down. And historically, in procurement, we were trained to like funnel all the spend to one supplier, completely ignoring the risks in doing that. And like, so, like, there's elements of that. There's elements of, COVID risk, and are people able to actually continue their jobs and keep all the parts going. That real-time data into your supply chain has never been more important than it is right now. So I wonder if we're entering an era where supply chain is sexy. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
um, I think we're entering an era where supply chain makes a product sexy, or makes the client feel sexy. I think the Amazon analogy that you use there is perfect, because we're all used to Amazon doing, the one-day delivery, next day delivery. And now that the supply chain's been impacted, which nobody really thinks about, what they're thinking about is a lovely, cool, sexy looking application that I can go onto. I can look at products, do a comparison, select one, and get it delivered. And the appeal there is it comes the next day as well. I've got it the next
Yeah.
day.
It's
Whereas
empowering the best possible customer experience.
exactly, and that luster has kind of lost its sheen, because to the point, it's not the next day; it's 2 weeks now.
Yeah.
And
In our industry, I feel like it never had, and like, it never had Amazon-like sheen, but people are, used to buying things on Amazon, and that's where their expectation is. And so we, as an industry, have to go and deliver something. We have to close that gap between what we do today and what Amazon is doing, or else someone will come in and fill that gap.
I had a conversation with a client a few years back. I was at a client review, and he turned around and he spoke to the whole leadership team sitting at that table. From account management, operations, finance, supply chain, everybody, and he just looked us all in the eye. And it's the old motor industry philosophy, insofar as when you're looking at your conveyor belt, the last thing you want to be doing is, your quality assurance at the end of that conveyor belt.
Right.
You want to be looking at every touch point on that conveyor belt and making sure that the machine, the individuals, whoever is standing on that conveyor belt is an issue resolutions expert as well.
Mm-hmm.
So, where it comes, if something's going wrong there, don't let the box get to the end of the conveyor belt and it's not right. Fix the problem there and then send it on to the next point.
Yeah. It's a
And
big cultural change for a lot of companies, because you have to empower those people to to own their decision, to own, okay, there's an issue here, I see it, I'm calling it out, as
Yeah.
opposed to, I think a lot of cultures, I don't want to get in trouble for this. I don't want to be blamed for, okay, let's just funnel it along. And then, so I think the auto industry in the 80s, Japan really turned that around. I think it was Charles Deming that his philosophy that went into that and made substantial changes at Toyota. And,
Mm.
but yeah, like, I think it's, that analogy is applicable to pretty much any industry.
And I mean, I think, and the difficult thing with our industry is we're not producing a car, we're not producing a box, we're not producing a book or something like that,
Sure.
where you can automatically see something's not right. We're dealing with people who, depending on their culture, what their makeup is, we don't always know that they're actually not satisfied with things that are going on.
Sure.
I've also sat I've sat around a round table with a couple of HR experts, and being the supply chain expert on that table, was asking a question around, how do you measure your KPIs? How do we always have these KPIs and SLAs in our contracts and our service agreements. How do you measure that, and how do you make that data relevant to you? And I had somebody very frankly, and I'm quite thankful that they did this, very frankly turned around to me and said, quite honestly, I'm not worried about the KPIs or the SLAs. I'm worried about the noise from my customers. If there's no noise, there's no problem. Yeah.
Yeah.
My procurement team are going to come after you for the SLAs because they want some money.
Yeah. Well, that's, so putting on my procurement hat for a second, I felt every single contract that I did even before I was at Accenture, they always had KPIs and SLAs in them, and they were always pretty similar. You carve them out, but I had no real way of seeing whether or not the data that I got back on an annual basis actually matched up to that. It's just procurement, methodology. It's all, okay, if you don't achieve this, we get money back. And I always thought that the right way to drive performance is not just using the stick, but also using the carrot. And unfortunately, I could never get my broader teams to buy into that. They didn't want to spend more if they were getting better experience. That was what they expected in the first place. Meanwhile, we had driven down costs pretty substantially through the RFP process. And so I think that SLAs are really important, but they have to be measurable. They have to be tracked on an ongoing basis, and looking at them like once a year, I think doesn't go really to impacting that transferee experience. It's too late. It's doing it in a more real-time thing, like what you were just talking about, where like if a transferee can thumbs up, thumbs down at multiple stages, now you've got something that can really deliver the better experience. And that ties back to what the client ultimately wants. They don't care about the SLAs. They just want a great performing supplier with no noise. And I think those touch points throughout the process, and digital makes it even more possible. That's my feeling about it.
And I feel, just because I am that geek, I feel any KPI, any SLA that you're going to write down into a contract, especially because somewhere along the lines you're going to be held accountable to that measurement.
Sure.
And the key in that is that measurement. You need to be able to measure it. And I think when you look at a lot of what happens, you look at the standard contract that you're looking at nowadays. It's got several KPIs, a few SLAs in there and stuff like that as well. And you're probably looking at maybe 3 or 4 of those that you're consistently measuring and reporting back to the client.
That sounds right.
Yeah. What happens with the other KPIs and SLAs? That's when a little bit of something goes a bit wrong, and then we can go and look at the contract and see what's meant to be happening, but it's not being managed. A part of what we want to do for our partners as well in the platform is it's that we want to create that holistic dashboard that measures all those KPIs. And I think this is where it starts playing into the procurement side of things as well, because if they're going to start drawing up those KPIs in contracts, they want to know that it's going to be measured. So maybe that counts against us in the fact that we want to measure those KPIs because they can hold us accountable to all of them.
It's a great problem to have.
It's a great problem to have. The flip side to that is, if you know what's going on, both from a procurement individual coming in, you know, or an account manager managing a client, or a partner managing services for a client, and you can see holistically where things are going wrong. I'm never a big supporter of the lowest cost. And it sounds weird for
I agree.
somebody sitting in supply chain and procurement to say, I don't want the lowest cost. I like to focus on the right cost.
Yeah.
If you want something as cheap as chips, I'll get that for you. But just understand that's a significantly reduced scope. There's probably not going to be the level of quality that you would have had before because you're getting a cheaper product.
Yeah, I completely agree. I have a few pet peeves with like procurement, supply chain, sourcing, that I experienced from my 15 years in doing that work. And the first is that the most supply chain, maybe not all supply chain, but most procurement and strategic sourcing professionals are measured on savings. That is the very easy thing to track, and that determined my bonus. If I didn't achieve $2 million or $4 million in savings that year, I wasn't getting the same level of bonus. And that's the wrong metric in my mind, because you've got business stakeholders uh, that have goals, and procurement is helping them achieve their goals. And going and saving money may not help them achieve their goals. I always felt that the right metric was tracking the stakeholders, how they viewed, what value did I create for them? How much did I help them? What did I take off their plate, make their lives easier with, so that they could go and focus on other things? And how did those decisions impact the business? Not from savings perspective, but from a growth perspective, more importantly. Savings, sure, track it. But
Yeah.
focusing on getting the lowest cost, in the first generation of strategic sourcing, where you're consolidating 20 different suppliers across the business, they're all doing very similar things, and now you're down to 3 or 5, or okay, there's a lot of savings that are generated there. You probably eliminated some Super Bowl tickets, which the employees shouldn't have been getting anyway. But like, every company is in their third, fourth, fifth generation of sourcing these categories, and now we're taking away jobs, and like everyone has to be 10% cheaper every single RFP, and like we end up.
Just, I'm going to quickly jump in there. Sorry to jump over you, but taking that down from 20 to 3 or 5. The one thing that you do is you send your risk rater.
Well, I actually disagree. So I think going from 20 different suppliers, because all the different business units are independent and doing their own thing, to some consolidation where you're strategically looking at it and saying, okay, these are the best suppliers, they meet our needs, we can have a more strategic partnership with them. There's cost to running a business. Having an account manager on a client, there's sort of a fixed element. There's obviously variable costs on top of it,
Yeah.
but by some consolidation, you drive efficiencies, you drive partnership, you drive lower costs. But eventually, that runs out. But the metrics that are imposed on sourcing are still tied towards savings. So I always had an issue with that, and I felt that where sourcing was focusing on savings, they weren't focusing on partnerships. In
Yeah.
fact, what I saw was a lot of strategic sourcing, and really supply chain managers in general, saying, this is a partnership with you. We really appreciate what you're doing. We just need you to cut your price by another
There we go.
7%. And it was always used as like beautifying, give me a lower cost. It was like, it was a weird way of doing that. And I saw my like friends and peers doing things like this, and I always thought that partnerships could be bigger than that. And I'm just curious, like, what your experience with this is, like, is this a pet peeve of yours by any chance?
I think supply chain managers using the partner, yeah. I've sometimes felt a little bit two-faced using that. It's not to say that I didn't want to partner with people. The reality is when you're procuring services for a client, it's the client's needs that you're meeting. Now, you want good partnerships to make that happen, but if that partnership at any point falls apart, you're not able to hit a cost metric, you're not able to hit a service metric or something like that, and it's not recoverable, well, you have to sever that partnership. And is that a true partnership? Now you're coming back to the I'm managing a supply chain here. This is business. It's nothing personal. Um, and I think when you're balancing volume, when the only thing that you have to give is volume, and volume is a fickle beast, really, at the end.
Sure.
Because you could lose a client to no fault of your own. They've just gone and procured services somewhere else,
Sure.
which means that the partners that are working with you, if they're not working with the next person that's getting that volume, have also suffered. So you all suffer together. Um, I think.
So we talked about the negative side of it. Let's talk about the positive side of it. I like from my perspective, I feel like what great partnerships need to be between mobility companies and the supply chain is how do we reduce the operational components, the friction, the costs between us to make it seamless as possible. And that is much harder to do. And it requires innovation, collaboration, and you know, really focusing on solving problems that aren't readily apparent. But like, if for instance, if you're asking me for reporting, let's say I'm a mover and you're a supply chain manager, you're asking me for reporting, and it takes me 40 hours a week to put together that reporting. Well, that's not good because I have to pass those costs back to you. How do we get you what you need in a way that is really efficient? Maybe what you need isn't necessarily that isn't what helps you achieve the goals for the client. Maybe you can change what you need so that we can both be more efficient. I feel like there's a lot of opportunity for partnerships like that to go and find those type of things, but it's hard.
And I think you hit the nail on the head. So everything that we were talking about earlier on, that milestone measurement, reporting, all those sort of things that come into play where that's the impact of supply chain, isn't it? It's tracking and managing and demonstrating that things are working the way they are meant to work. And if they're not, having the data to support where it needs to improve as well. So the more milestones and KPIs that you can, and I'm not saying that I want to, create the internet of things around mobility where you can, track your heartbeat and control the temperature of your fridge and everything. In so far, you don't want to bring redundant items into it, but you want to take a look at what we do. You want to look at and let's take the moving process. There's several milestones or points where you can actually indicate how things have gone and take an opportunity to move. First contact is going to be for everybody. Survey, pack and load, transport to the port, transit, whether it be by air or by sea, arrival at port, and then delivery to the home residence or the host residence. If you're tracking everything that's going on there, so often that once you've done the pack and load, what typically happens is they say, okay, we'll have your goods with you next month in the UK. Mm-hmm. And 30-day goes by and now there's no updates and stuff like that. They should know when their shipment arrived to the port. Mm-hmm. They should know when their shipment got onto a ship or got onto the plane. They should know when it's, if it's on a ship, it's a few days out of port. They should know that it's landed. They should know that it's in customs at the moment. All those sort of things should be happening because everything that we do in this industry, it all comes down to knowing and communicating effectively. And if I know what's going on and I don't have to ask the questions, I feel more at ease. Absolutely. And I'm not frustrated when I call you for an update.
Well, and you can plan.
Yes.
So it enables you to be more strategic. If you know that the goods are arriving at this certain time, and okay, well then let's schedule move in the next day, or that day. And like I told you, I had a car delivered this morning. I had no idea it was coming until I had no idea it was arriving today. I thought it was arriving on Saturday until I got a call 20 minutes before it was arriving, and I was thinking about what we were doing here right now. I was like, if it happens during then, I guess you're going to be waiting outside for a couple hours. But like it's that I think you're spot on in that, and I think where the industry is going is actually beyond those individual touch points. Those are super important, and if we can get to that, we have solved so many challenges on the supply chain side. But what I see is you know, in the moving industry, there's been tremendous growth in
Yeah.
containerization. And there's a bunch of companies that are trying to put an electronic device in these containers that show humidity level, when it was open, when it was closed, how fast it's going, temperature, where it is in the transit. And so you start pairing these components with those touch points, uh, it's going to deliver a fantastic transfer experience when it comes to moving. And I don't think we're that far away from it. But when you consider where the moving and mobility industry was before COVID and where we're going to be in a matter of 2 years, it is just tremendous change.
I think
I just find it fascinating.
we've all had the opportunity to sit back now. Well, let's be honest, volumes down, our clients haven't been moving, and we've had the opportunity to look at all these to-do items,
Yeah.
saying, you know, this is tech is going to be so much more relevant coming out the back end of this, because, you know, we have to now be prepared for this to happen again. It's happened once. One thing we can definitely say for certain, it might not be COVID-19, it might be COVID-23 that comes along and causes the same sort of shutdown. But we know it's more than possible that it can happen, and we need to be prepared for it. And that's
In
where the
addition,
supply chain needs to jump in and make their moves along those lines and make those transformations.
yeah, I think everything you said is correct. And then on top of that, the consumer habits have changed. If you look at consumer retail, online retail as a part of total retail, it was like 12, 13, 14%. Every year it would go up by 1%. And
Yeah.
in 8 weeks, it went up 10%. It's we changed 5 to 10 years in 6 months.
Yeah.
And the expectations that we have when we go and buy something on Amazon, we know where it is, we can track it on FedEx, like that is coming to every industry, including ours, which is putting a lot of demand for change on the supply chain managers and people in our industry. And I've actually felt very empathetic to people like you and the supply chain managers at relocation management companies, and just because I think COVID has disproportionately impacted them. I talked with someone at a mid-sized RMC the other day who runs their supply chain. He's working till 11 o'clock at night all the time. Just
Well, the supply chain has suddenly become responsible for giving you all your information. And the reason why the supply chain is responsible for giving you all your information is because you don't have the correct integrations in place. Or when your partners are updating their platforms,
yeah,
for you to get that information, because they're either having to update your platforms, which, as much as we'd like to say they're going to do it every 24 hours or every 48 hours, their platform manages the move. They're more focused on doing that. They know that when it comes to invoicing, everything in your platform needs to be up to date. So depending on what you have and how your partners are set up, yes, it will happen. It could probably happen once every 48 hours because there's an admin pushing everything into it, once a week, once a month when it comes to invoicing, something like that. What you need, and where we are now, and we're on that tipping point where
yeah,
everybody is looking for the integration of, I just want things to send information where it needs to be.
mm-hmm.
And that is I had 14 and a half years at Kpis.
Wow.
And I am now close on a year at Clearmove. And I've been watching them develop products that all the fantasies I had in my past life, when I'd sit down with my colleagues and talk about, wouldn't it be great to track this? Wouldn't it be great to have this integration happen? Wouldn't it be great to have, internal document uploads and instant messaging with your customers? Because let's face it, we're all absolutely petrified of using email, because that's the biggest vulnerability that we have. Yeah, you can put the correct encryption over it and the likes of, but it's still the most vulnerable spot that you have.
Yeah.
So why don't you just build a closed environment? Yes, people are so used to using applications nowadays.
Mm-hmm.
And if I'm going to do all my fitness, I go into my fitness app and I get everything there, and it's all isolated in there, unless you use Strava, and then everybody and their cousin can see where you've been, which route you've been taking. But it's all right there. And it's not being shared with anybody else unless I choose to share with somebody else. And the nice thing about it is I don't have to email it. I
Yeah.
can go into my application and share it with another user, and it stays in that application.
Yeah, I think, you know, I've never heard more people talking about APIs than right now. We were in the innovator stage a few years ago, even though APIs had been around for a while, but in the mobility space, it just wasn't there. A lot of software wasn't even built for the cloud. It was like individual applications loaded on this specific hard drive. Well, you're not going to have an API work in that environment. So now that all the different supply chains within mobility are running applications that are in cloud, now we're going to see a tremendous amount of APIs between them, which is just going to make tremendous progress in this area. Ed Hannibal at Deloitte, I know Deloitte did a study a few years ago about what mobility managers want more than anything else. And it was to have instantaneous access to their data. They wanted to know where everything was and all in one platform. So like this is something that mobility managers are asking for. And I think we're just going to see a tremendous change in
Yeah.
the next few years.
We've been talking about the customer a lot, you know, the actual employee assignee that's moving.
Yep.
But I think you need to take the clients into consideration overall. When you're measuring your KPIs, one of those things that you're going to be measuring is invoicing and accuracy. And that's one of the KPIs that I've seen in many contracts that I've reviewed. Invoicing and accuracy are two things that go hand in hand. Data integrity and accuracy of data, and then invoicing and accuracy of invoicing. And if you're tracking that and you're measuring that, you have to ask yourself how a provider that delivers top quality service is able to give you such a reduced cost. But if you look at the back end and you see the finance team that's spending an extra 20 hours a month trying to resolve all the invoicing errors that are coming through, you know, you're losing productivity in that space. And let's face it, if you're impacting the finance team, you're impacting a business.
Yeah, it's an externalized cost that doesn't get to be part of that evaluation.
No.
And that's where so we're aligned. You don't want to go with the cheapest provider. You want to go with the one that's creating value, minimizing noise, and can invest in in a partnership with you to avoid those type of issues. And I think that, like, we've been talking now for over a half hour. I think one of the things that I'm incredibly grateful for is that we have a partnership together. And I'm curious, like, because we haven't actually talked to this. Like, what do you see? What did you see, and why did you decide to partner with us? What's the impact to you?
The impact to me is we're building an application that we want to join everything up on. You know, I've had many years in supply chain. I've dealt with household goods, both on the US domestic platform and in the international arena. It was all established. So trying to put something together from scratch was a bit of it was a bit of a daunting experience. And through a couple of conversations, I got your name, and we started speaking. And the more I started learning about PricePoint, the more I knew I had to be partnering with you. I knew that why would I want to go and build something to get all my providers pricing in? And I say all my providers, you know, you start off with a relatively small network and that will grow over time as your volume grows. Why do I go and build something when it already exists? And the big part of where this partnership is really good for me as well is your monthly reporting. So I might only be using a handful of partners right now. You have access to 700 partners that use your platform in one guise or another.
We're over 800 now.
Oh, over 800 now. Well, there we go, and it carries on growing. I get market data, and the partners that I'm using are getting market data every month. You know, that says, okay, here's your average cost of a move on this lane, for example. Here's the market average, and that's not just for the volume that you're doing, Clearmove. That's the volume that's going into that lane with all 800 partners that we have for all clients. And it's scrubbed up, there's nothing in there, it's just the average cost of what's going on there. I automatically know whether I'm higher than the average, lower than the average, and I know, and by the way, my partner knows at the same time. So they're getting the same reports I'm getting. So when we join up to have a talk about how our relationship's going and how things are going, and I see that they're 25% over the market average, I'm kind of like, what's that about? And they already know that I'm going to ask that question when I get on. And I think the value in that and the value in all of this is it's the right data being managed in the right way and shared at the right point. We take care of all the customer experience and how the partner engages with that customer. But you guys are the experts at the pricing. You've got the platform that's pulling all that pricing together. And all the people that work in your platform know it and trust it. So, you know, out of all the partners that I've been working with, there were one or two who are kind of like, yeah, I haven't worked with it directly, but we've got offices that do work with it, so there shouldn't be a problem. I've not had anybody come back to me and say, who's PricePoint? Not a chance are we working with them. And that kind of speaks volumes to me as well, because had I had anybody say no, I've spoken about different approaches and different people in the industry on who to partner with to possibly look after our clients. No names mentioned, but I did think about connecting with somebody, and I had one or two of the partners that I'm engaged with say, well, if you do approach that company, you know, with the greatest respect, we understand why you're doing it, but we're not going to participate. Wow. So, you know, the fact that people are willing to say that, and the fact that I've heard nothing bad about PricePoint, and then we're later down the road now, and we've gone through an implementation. That's what was drawing me to you in the beginning, the possibilities. And now that we've actually gone through it, it's kind of like, I'm so glad that the feeling up front, and what you said earlier on, you don't necessarily get to see all the nuts and bolts and how everything works and all the metrics. It's more about a feeling that you get with somebody. Now, you guys did show us a few of the nuts and bolts and how everything works, but it was a good feeling, and that carried on through the implementation as well. So in my view, I think we've made a good choice in partnering.
James, I really appreciate it. I felt the love. I felt the love there. I really did. No, I'm incredibly grateful that we're getting the partners together. I think you guys are doing some amazing things, and I think you're positioned well to really solve some big challenges for DSPs, for relocation management companies, to really streamline the supply chain, and do it in a way that just empowers all the things that we were talking about today. It's really, I have not seen, you know, I see a lot of technology platforms out there. I have not seen any other platforms that are focusing on supply chain the way you are, and that your team is. So I'm really excited about what's to come, and look forward to growing a beautiful partnership together. But thanks again for taking the time with me today. This has been fun. I really enjoyed talking with you. We didn't get to talk about graphic novels or some whiskey.
I mean, had we had a few more minutes, I'm sure we could have shared our thoughts with everybody on what graphic novels are the best ones to be getting a hold of lately.
Yeah, but thanks again for making this happen, and let's do it again soon.